Guys, this week I'm going to read you a certain genre of book called a tall tale. And remember, genre is just a fancy French word for type. So we've learned about a lot of different types of books this year. We've learned about realistic fiction, we've learned about fantasy, we've read how-to books, we've read nonfiction books, um, we've read personal narratives, stories that are told by the person themselves, the main character. And this genre of tall tale is a type of folk tale, but it's a distinctly American type of folk tale. Tall tales were based upon different people when this country was growing. And Paul Bunyan is a lumberjack. And when this country was, we've talked about this before, when people were moving west across the country a long time ago, lumberjacks were the men who would cut down trees to use to build houses, and they would do things like that. So Paul Bunyan is a lumberjack, and what makes this a tall tale is that these people, these regular people, were kind of seen as heroes. And what started to happen is people would exaggerate what their skills were or how strong they were or how big they were because they really thought they were heroes building this country. And so this tale is about Paul Bunyan. You can see him here. He's a huge man hanging out with the mountain lions. That's definitely an exaggeration. The truth is stretched. Paul Bunyan by Stephen Kellogg. Paul Bunyan was the largest, smartest, and strongest baby ever born in the state of Maine. Look at him there with his crib over his head. Even before he learned to talk, Paul showed an interest in the family logging business. He took the lumber wagon and wandered through the neighborhood collecting trees. He's just ripping them out of the ground as a toddler. Look. Can you see him there? Just tearing it right out of the ground. That's definitely an exaggeration. There were so many complaints about Paul's visits that his parents anchored his cradle in the harbor. And look at him there, feeding seals with bottles. All was well until Paul started rocking the cradle and stirring up the waves. After his parents had paid for the damage, they decided to move to the backwoods where life would be more peaceful. Look at Paul. He's riding that like a wave runner, rocking and causing a huge flood. Paul loved his new wilderness home. He soon grew into a sturdy lad who was so quick on his feet he could blow out a candle and leap into bed before the room became dark. Blow out a candle and leap into bed before the room got dark? That can't be true, right? Every day he joined his forest friends in their sports. He raced with the deer and wrestled with the grizzlies. One morning, Paul awoke to find the world under a blanket of blue snow. He heard a moan from inside a snowdrift, and there he found a shivering ox calf. Paul adopted him and named him Babe. Both Paul and Babe began growing at an astonishing rate, but the ox never lost the color of the snow from which he'd been rescued. As the years passed, the two of them proved to be extremely helpful in the family business. So there's the blue ox calf that Paul found, and here they are helping with the family's logging business. Or at least Paul is. I don't know what Blue is doing. At 17, Paul grew a fine beard, which he combed with the top of a pine tree. By the time other settlers were beginning to crowd into the Maine woods, Paul felt an urge to move on. He said goodbye to his parents and headed west. Paul wanted to cross the country with the best lumbering crew available. He hired Ole, a celebrated blacksmith, and two famous cooks, Sourdough Slim and Cream Puff Fatty. Then he signed up legendary lumbermen like Big Tim Burr, Hard Jaw Murphy, and the Seven Hackett brothers. There he is, combing his beard with the tree. And here he is. There are the seven Hackett brothers. Get it? They hack at the tree with their axe. Hack it. Kind of funny, right? Paul put the camp buildings on wheels so Babe could haul them from one forest to another. As soon as he had cleared the land, pioneers moved in to set up farms and villages. On the far slopes of the Appalachian Mountains, several of Paul's men were ambushed by a gang of underground ogres called the Gumbaroos. Paul grabbed the camp dinner horn and blew a thunderous note into the Gumbaroos' cave, determined to blast the meanness right out of them. To Paul's dismay, the Gumbaroos responded by snatching his entire crew. A wild, rough and tumble rumpus began inside the den. So a rumpus is like a big wrestling match, right? Look at the Gumbaroos. When the historic tussle was over, the Gumbaroos needed 6 weeks to untangle themselves. They disappeared into the depths of the earth, and they've never been heard from since. Paul's next job was to clear the heavily forested Midwest. He hired armies of extra woodsmen and built enormous new bunkhouses. The men sailed up to bed in balloons and parachuted down to breakfast in the morning. Unfortunately, the cooks couldn't flip flapjacks fast enough to satisfy all the customers. All the newcomers, sorry. I love this idea of flying up to bed in a balloon and then parachuting down for breakfast. That would be kind of a fun thing to do, I think. To solve the muddle, Paul built a colossal flapjack griddle. The surface was greased by kitchen helpers with slabs of bacon laced to their feet. Look, like a hockey rink. And instead of ice skates, these guys are sliding around on bacon, chunks of bacon under their feet. Every time the hot griddle was flooded with batter, it blasted delicious flapjacks high up into the clouds. Usually the flapjacks landed neatly beside the griddle, but sometimes they were a bit off target. Look, this one landed on top of the building, flying huge flapjacks. Paul took a few days off to dig the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes so that barges of Vermont maple syrup could be brought to camp. Now, clearly, Paul did not dig the Great Lakes, did he? No, or the St. Lawrence River. Fueled by the powerful mixture of flapjacks and syrup, the men leveled the Great Plains and shaved the slopes of the Rocky Mountains. They probably would have sawed the peaks themselves into logs if a blizzard hadn't suddenly buried the entire mountain range. The blizzard continued for several years, snuffing out springs, summers, autumns. The crew burrowed into their bunkhouses and hibernated. Babe became so depressed that Paul asked Ole to make a pair of sunglasses for his friend. When Babe saw the world colored green, he thought he'd stumbled into a field of clover. He began eating the snow with such gusto that soon the treetops reappeared. Once again, could that possibly be true? At that point, all those pent-up springtime simply exploded, dissolving the storm clouds and the remaining snow. Paul and his friends invited some newly arrived settlers to join them in a celebration of all the holidays that had been missed. You can see, if you look carefully, ways they're celebrating all those holidays. After the festival, the lumberjacks continued their journey. But as they headed southwest, the blistering sun and the giant Texas varmints proved to be more of a problem than they had expected. Travel became so difficult that some of the men began to speak longingly of being buried by a blizzard or bear hugged by a gumbaroo. While crossing Arizona, the griddle curled up like a burnt leaf and the batter evaporated. Deprived of their flapjacks, the lumbermen became weak and discouraged. Paul's great axe fell from its shoulder, gouging a jagged trench, which today is known as the Grand Canyon. Once again, this is an exaggeration. Disaster seemed certain until Paul came up with a desperate plan. He headed east and found a family that could sell him a barn filled with corn. Babe galloped it back across the desert. When the flaming sunrise hit that barn, it exploded, and the lumbermen awoke to find themselves in a raging blizzard of popcorn. Dizzy with joy, they pulled on their mittens and began blasting each other with popcorn balls. A westerly wind swept the cooling clouds of popcorn swirling around Paul and his crew until they crossed California and reached the Pacific Ocean. And there you see Paul lifting a whale above his head. After he had crossed the country, some say Paul gave up lumbering and rambled north searching for new areas of untouched wilderness. With the passing years, Paul has been seen less and less frequently. However, along with his unusual size and strength, he seems to possess an extraordinary longevity. That means he's living a lot of years. Sometimes his great bursts of laughter can be heard rumbling like distant thunder across the wild Alaskan mountain ranges where he and Babe still roam. So again, tall tales are based on real people who were, working to build this country a long time ago. And there were lumberjacks, and they were strong, and they did work hard, and they did eat flapjacks, but they certainly didn't dig the Great Lakes. And maybe there was a lumberjack named Paul Bunyan, and maybe he was a particularly big and strong lumberjack. But of course, these stories over time have gotten told over and over again, and people add their own little twist to it and exaggerations. Okay, guys, hope you enjoyed it.